A rather special day today. To start with, it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Eaglen, who's an artist from North Wales, interested in the relationships between art and science, between technology and nature. So it's going to be multi-sensory, multidisciplinary, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much, Mark.
Okay, Proud, good morning to all. I'd just like to thank Bill and Simon for inviting me to take part in this fantastic conference. It's lovely to be able to present work in front of this room of very talented individuals. As Simon said, I'm an artist, so I'm not a mathematician. Don't judge me on my ability with numbers. And science is a great inspiration to me. Mathematics runs through my work because mathematics runs through nature, and nature is a great inspiration to me as well. So, as much as I don't pretend to have the depth of understanding that everyone in this room does, I do have a great enthusiasm for the subject area that I'm exploring. So, I was fortunate to have a chat with Adil months ago, following finding his paper about scutoids existing in foam, which was an area of my explorations at the time, and that's still a fuel for my work currently. So what I'm going to be doing this morning is there's kind of two chapters to my presentation. So first is going to be to give a kind of overview of my practice as an artist and my inspirations and the work I've kind of been exploring, and then how that's led to my point of contacting Bill and my interest in the Scutoid, along with things like quantum foam, which I'm sure there's going to be interesting discussions around that hopefully later. So the two chapters are this presentation, and then there's a strange box located at the front of the room, which is an interactive device which will be driving a piece of work that I've recently shared at the National Estate of Wales, which is where I'm currently at with my developing work in response to Scutoids and quantum foam. So hopefully that'll be an enjoyable way to conclude the session. So to begin with, we're going to be looking at a bit of a backwards journey. So I've talked about where we're going to end up. And so to start the session, I've kind of tried to think about how can I make something relevant in this presentation in relation to the conference that's taking place. With, you know, my understanding of geometry packing of cell division is minimal. So I thought, okay, let's think about packing problems for myself. So my first packing problem is, how do I package who I am? Present that to you. So yes, as Simon said, I'm an artist. I have been born, although sometimes I don't know it. My education is ongoing. I'm constantly learning, as we all are. And yeah, everything else should explain itself there. And as Simon said, my inspirations are across the arts, the sciences, nature, and technology. So essentially everything. I'm a bit of a magpie. I want to scream like that. So that's a bit of background about me, and it's definitely background because this portrait was taken over 10 years ago, where I was far less grown. So in regards to kind of context, I thought it might be quite helpful to present this as a kind of starting point. So this is, I've never quite known how to pronounce this. Is it a Menger or a Menger sponge? You familiar with this? Menger, there we go. So this is a piece of kind of exploratory work that I did a few years ago, where I was looking at this idea of this multi-dimensional kind of cube and the facets and the intersections. And the reason I'm sharing this to start with is because it's kind of the distinction between, you know, I don't pretend to be a scientist. Many say I don't pretend to be an artist either. But I guess this is the distinction between maybe some areas there, because this is some modelling done. It's a responsive piece, actually. It's just a video recording of it, where I was exploring it just as a form, and then iterations of that form. But then you'll notice that there's something slightly strange going on with the perspective of that section of it. There's facets that kind of cross over in strange ways. The geometry doesn't quite make sense to us. And so if this is a scientific model, that'd be a failure, wouldn't it? But as an artist, I'm embracing that because of the way that the perception of things are shifted. And if it's a multi-dimensional object, then maybe that's an appropriate glitch, perhaps. So I thought that might be quite a good way to kind of show that distinction, that although I'm very much inspired by sciences, the work I've made is not illustrative. I'm not looking to illustrate. I'm kind of looking to discover and to explore connections between things in many ways. And one of those things is dealing with ideas of perception and scale. So another thing that I believe we discussed briefly on our video call, actually, Adil, was this thing between the arts and the sciences and how there's been a separation of these two kind of worlds, but actually in the past, they used to be quite integrated, the sciences and the humanities. And so as much as what I do is within the arts, there may be aspects of the processes I employ that have echoes of how you approach things. I don't want to kind of predetermine that, but as an artist, I have a vocabulary, which is based around materials and understanding their space and engagement with different modes of presentation and human interaction. But then I also have ideas that may be just hunches to explore. Sometimes they're more formulated and kind of clear in their vision. But then in the creation of work, it's quite experimental. So as I'm exploring things, I may find different avenues that I couldn't predict, and then that guides me in other ways. And then there's the general context of the ideas that I'm exploring, which kind of help shape the world I'm operating in. So the reason I've included this slide is to hopefully, are there any crossovers between your own sort of practices as mathematicians, where you've got this hunch or exploring this thing and you don't quite know where it's going to go, but you're finding things along the journey, it takes you in other directions you couldn't predict. And it's all about that kind of recursive sort of network of thought that happens, where you're responding to what you're discovering. And play is a really important part of the process for me. So I don't really pretend to know anything. I'm just constantly searching and discovering things and responding. So that leads me to kind of the first point of reference where I started to engage with technology and embrace kind of organic systems. So video feedback is something that I'm sure everyone's heard of, aware of. If not, there's Jimi Hendrix with his guitar, it's the same principle. So where you're feeding an input, which is the output, back into itself, and it generates things. So video feedback, I stumbled across it. I didn't pretend to invent it. It's been around for decades. But I was very excited about what came from that. So these are some examples of patterns generated from an early experiment into video feedback. I'm just pointing a camera at a screen and feeding it through the loop. There was a distinguishing moment when I was doing this where it became this form. And there's a link here. I tried to upload the PDF, but it wouldn't, so maybe I'll share that with Simon. You can look at things further. But when this is in motion, that bottom image, it's like a liquid. It sort of behaves like a ripple. And I found that really compelling. I didn't quite know what was happening there, but it was definitely this kind of very organic, natural thing happening, but through a technological process, analog loop. And that was a driver then for me to explore where could that take me as an artist in 3 dimensions. So I started to do some carvings around that, ideas of kind of repetition and rhythm going through there. And ideas of subtraction actually as well. So I thought this might be an interesting one for everyone to see because of the packing of things. This is me extracting things really. And there's no formula at work here. It's just me responding to the object and just beveling bits out until I'm ending up with, I'm interested in this point where there's kind of almost nothing left. And maybe the point between that where the cube is gone, but it's starting to become something else. So I guess with my practice, it engages with technology, but I quite often go between traditional and non-traditional processes.
Can you just say something about how those are made, if they were made?
Yeah, they were made. They were made by hand. These are the scale of ice
What
cubes.
was by hand?
Well, that's a good question. By hand with a Dremel. So a Dremel is like it's like a drill, but it's the one that I've got is you've got small hands, so it's not like you've got some wieldy thing because the scale of these is very small. So I'm just there with my little ice cube sized blocks of plaster. I'm just carving until I reach some kind of harmony of form that I'm happy with. And then I moved on to another one. So you may see in the background there's a sequence of these. So the idea was that it's kind of like, I did an animation of that as well. So I was kind of interested in how do I present this over time. So yeah, I don't know if that answers. But yeah, by hand, that's a big question, isn't it? Because that was by hand but with a machine. So where do we stop? So the driver from that was I thought, okay, let me work on a slightly smaller piece, and this is only slightly small. It's, you know, still quite small. How far can I take a piece before it falls apart? So this is incredibly fragile. So whenever I get it out, I'm like, like this little bird's egg. And it's about trying to extract, but keep it connected, and just to see what's left from that.
I don't know whether you're open to discussion instead of started. One of the things that I find interesting is that we tend to visualize or visualize, really sensualize, we tend to sense things from the complementary region we want to become about what's left. Many of us here, often the complementary region and what's left are actually congruent. One can be moved into the other one.
Yeah.
And I'll wait to see if you created any things like that. The ones so far, the complementary region is geometrically very different from the
Yeah. So I haven't been, I mean, the subtraction from this has been dust.
Yes.
So the complement to that is, yeah, whatever remains. And that's interesting in itself. But with current technologies, that's definitely something that's yeah, could be palpable, you know, especially with scanning technologies. I think to sculpt the positive and the negative at the same time with an output for both would be quite challenging, but I like the idea of the challenge of that. So yeah, good question. So from this point, I returned back to the digital process because I'd gone into the spatial. I started to do a lot of what ifs, and one of those what ifs was, what if I could visualize this pattern generation from feedback as a form, but through holography? What would that look like? What would that feel like? So I was very fortunate to receive an Arts Council of Wales grant to make that happen. And I'm sure you can appreciate it's really difficult to take a photograph or document a hologram, because the nature of a hologram is that it's, yeah. And I'm not going to go into the details of process there, but essentially this was a working graphic as I was working with the people who create the holograms to the depth of things. So it's based on a television screen, and the feedback is kind of coming out of the screen. So it's informed by a kind of sculpture of the TV as an object. And it's rooted in an aesthetic based on my kind of my decade of birth in the 70s. So it's got that sort of retro feel. But when you're standing over it, it projects around about 30 centimeters from the surface. So that you get this strange perception shift when you're placing your hand through it. But I was very interested in the kind of poetry present there, that you've got this feedback process, and I'm helping it escape the screen into another dimension. And relating back to the Menger sponge. So there's a video link there, should anyone want to see elements of that. So that in turn led me to paths of something I'd been aware of for some time about the static being received from analog television sets. I've been obsessed by TV as an object for many years. Probably haven't been sat in front of it since I was yay high. And then obviously with the sculpture that I've just presented, I've been engaging with things here to do with the TV static and how that contains a remnant, percentage remnant from the origin of our universe, the Big Bang, the microwave background. And so that led me to want to see how I could explore that. And so this graphic on the right-hand side is looking at taking this background and imagining what would it be like to be outside of it. So in a similar way to what happened with the television piece with the hologram, I'm putting myself outside of that image. So I took the cosmic microwave background and I wrapped it around a sphere and I reversed it, and then I adjusted height levels on that sphere based on temperature that's in the data, imagining that the point of origin would be hotter than the Big Bang occurring on its extremities. Resulted in this form here, which was presented as a light box as well as a video loop implementation, and was longlisted for the Aesthetic Art Prize. It's been shown in various places. So this is an anaglyph 3D image as well. So I've got some glasses if we have time. You can get them easily anyway, the red blue glasses, the old things. And then, so that pops off the screen, and it's an imagining. It's not, as I say, it's not an illustration, but it's using data to drive its form of an external view of the observable universe as it stood from the Planck map. So I appreciate I'm covering quite a lot of topics here, but from going outside of the universe, I decided to go more internal, so going back inside of space rather than outside it. And I engaged with a world of looking at the crossovers between digital and physical space, which is very much something that's the thing of our time. And how we kind of navigate that in our landscape, where it's becoming increasingly the case that we're holding onto these devices, we're operating through these devices, we're in this physical space as well as that digital one all the time. And I thought this next form might be of interest to you. It's fool's gold, so pyrite, and I basically it was classed as a matrix. I don't know what the origins of that term are with this, but I painted the core of the material with green screen paint, so it's kind of like this idea of a kind of facade, maybe the fool's gold of what we see on the screen. But I just love how this is being created in nature. It's so kind of, you know all this already, but I was very excited about finding these sorts of forms when I'm in love with the organic kind of form, but then this seems to have echoes of how we construct, and yeah, I find that quite fascinating. So, in a long roundabout way, this led me to scutoids. And I've already had discussions with Adil, who's pointed out that actually wide sensation over scutoids, the new forms being found all the time, and I'm really interested in speaking to you more about that. But at the time, I was just really excited about hearing of this form, and how it had been presented as this new form that's been discovered all these years that we haven't known about it, and its kind of duty within what the structures it's in, with that kind of planes of tension and its integrity. And it made me think of it, rightly or wrongly, as a capstone of an arch, and the strength of that to maintain that as an arch. And so I started to explore what's that like as a form? What can I do with that as a form? What does that mean? Because it seemed like a bridging structure to me. And you may have taken from the work that I've shared so far, I'm quite interested in connecting things from different places. So I saw this both as a sort of metaphor as well as a kind of a sculptural object. And so I initially explored that digitally. And this is part of the wider kind of digital physical work, which was looking at early arcade machines and computer gaming technologies. But then I just had to make one. So I guess making for me is as much about exploration and discovery as it is anything else, because although I can visualize this and I can do stuff in the computer, when you've actually got the object, you can engage with it in a different way. And then we've got a tesseract there just for good measure. I've just had to put that in with an arcade machine. But this is about looking at these kind of spatial relationships of the form. And I'm still trying to get my head around how scutoids connect en masse, but I'm under the impression that they connect with other types of building blocks and then kind of they kind of hold that integrity. So that, and quite a whistle-stop tour, is the build up to where I am now. So I apologize for the kind of the speed at which I passed through there. Okay. So I started to consider this thing of crossing spaces, which has been running through all of those previous pieces of work, if you think about it, different kind of perception of space, the linking between physical and digital. And this is the same process that was at work that fed the hologram piece. But what I'm really excited about currently is how technology is allowing us to do things that would previously take a long period of time, like rendering, which is when you've made the thing. I'm sure we're still rendering something with your modeling. And you have to wait for that thing to come out at the end. But real-time processing has been quite a breakthrough over the last, well, I guess, decade or so. And now it's kind of, it's reachable for us to use, or it seems to be. So this is a height map generated from feedback as a live source. So what we did in the hologram, I had to kind of process that image, send it off, make it into hologram. Now this is a live feed of feedback going into some software which is generating topography. So I'm really interested about possibilities of that. And that frames where my current thinking is in regards to this wider project of infrastructure of the Interspatial Interlacer, which is a wonderful tongue twister. It's meant to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, slightly humorous, but also it's kind of got underpinnings in the research that's surrounding it. So I've been looking at many different factors. So as a reference at the beginning, there's quantum foam, there's scutoids, there's also this thing of bridging systems. There's things like dark matter and energy, gravitational waves. So it feels it's an honor to be presenting here, but it's also an honor to be presented as part of the Isaac Newton Institute with its reference to gravity here. I mean, I'm the smallest leaf on a massive apple tree, but it's great to be here. And then you've got interdependencies as well, so how things kind of connect and relate. So hopefully you can see from this that there's connections to the previous work, but it's traveling in new directions. One of those directions here is, this is kind of a kinetic idea for a kinetic work based on gravitational waves. So this is gravitational wave data that's just repeated as a sine wave and then looped slightly offset, so you get a wave on a wave. I just had to throw that in because of the hosts. So here we are, epithelial cell structures, which I don't pretend to know much about, but what I have picked up about this thing in the membrane and how the integrity of the forms to have such complex patterns and shapes. And again, the inspiration from the Scutoid was hearing evidence that it's present across so many like interspecies. And I just thought that was just phenomenal. And I know that you're sat there thinking, well, so many things go across interspecies, but for me, that was an eye-opener.
I think the only thing is that quite a few people here might not know what a Scutoid is.
Oh, okay. Well, you're better grounded to discuss what that is, I suppose. But it's yeah. So a Scutoid then is a form. I'm going to get this very wrong now. I feel like a pressure speaking in front of you about that. So it's a building block within nature. So you've got like various forms that you might find. Let's use foam for an example. So some of those things may be quite sort of cuboid. I can never remember the main kind of truncated ones with different numbers of sides. The thing that distinguishes the Scutoid, if I just return back, oh yeah, there we go, is this facet of the triangle. So you've got a number of sides, top and bottom, and one side loses a side basically. So you're going from 6 to 5 sides, and so the form, to maintain its integrity, has to give something. And so it gives at this point, it results in this facet. And what I've gathered from this, the importance of it is that when that is in a neighbour to other forms, then there is surface tension happening across each of those planes, which creates great integrity, which makes things like foam, as much as it's fragile, you can blow it and off it's gone. It's actually incredibly strong in many ways. It's holding itself together as how I'm perceiving it. And it's in part because of things like that. So there aren't weak spots, well, there are weak spots, I suppose, but the planes are all in direct contact. And that as an enabler allows things to kind of become incredibly complex as far as I could go. Is that kind of—
Excuse me, are you aware that this particular figure has cropped up in the scientific literature recently?
Yeah, that's where I found it. Was discovered in 2017.
It's called Scutoid.
Yeah.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good.
And then loads of people have been doing stuff with like salt and pepper pots and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been grabbed by lots of artists and designers. So I'm not the only person exploring this, but I'm hoping my explorations of this may be quite distinct from mine. Does that go some way to shape the idea of what the Scutoid is?
Yeah,
thank you for your kind of patience just sitting there nodding if you didn't know what it was. Do feel free to ask if I'm either going too fast or saying something that didn't make sense. With Voronoi, we're all aware of Voronoi though, I'm guessing. Voronoi tessellation. Yeah, so Again, I don't pretend to be an expert of that, but I found these kind of the connections between the idea of the scutoid and those facets of the 5 to 6 sides and how neighboring kind of cells go together with Voronoi. I was really interested in how Voronoi relies upon these invisible points in the middle, the appropriate middle of each cell, in order to be what it is. And so you've got this invisible network taking place amongst the cell structure. So I've gone from epithelial cell structures with the scutoid into the mathematical kind of construct of the cell packing, and then into this invisible network of interdependency. And I guess this is hopefully a showcase of, again, that thing within my practice where I'm not illustrating, I'm trying to explore connections. So we've got the biological and mathematical, and then with the interdependency networks, there's also things that engage ideas of technology. So things like how we connect across the internet, or for anyone that's aware of what Web3 is proposing to be a decentralized kind of network of connection. There's lots of kind of relevant areas across many different fields. So that led me back to more sculpture. Thank you very much. So some of these are kind of just kind of explorations of those facets. There's an element of quantum foam going on in the background. This is just kind of packing of cells. And again, coming back to not being an illustrator, I'm aware that quantum foam is not necessarily actually a structure of foam, but because of its title, I'll explore those connections. But I became very interested as well into as I was making these, they seemed to generate some kind of character. They felt almost anthropomorphic. So I'm wanting to explore these at human heights and just see what it feels like to be walking amongst them. So again, bridging systems and forms, which brings us here. So this is kind of echoes of Voronoi, as well as echoes of the Scutoid. But in a way, you're looking as a topography, so looking top down. So you can see that as this is being generated, the number of sides to those cells are changing. So I started to think, well, okay, as I'm exploring this more sort of generative time-based work, although this is kind of a flat plane and image, within it, potentially there are scutoids being created. It's just you're seeing it as slices, so you're seeing it over time.
How are you doing this? What's the process?
The process is using a piece of software called Touch Designer, and you can basically create anything out of it. It's a phenomenal piece of software. So this is employing lots of different kind of coding blocks, which I can't really go into here. But the piece that we'll see to conclude this is driven by that, so you'll be able to play with this. So with this, I've sliced this very short loop up into 15 individual segments of time.
But I'm really also interested in these shady or hazy traces.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
So that happens, I mean, if we're going into process, this actually works through a feedback loop, but it's a feedback loop constructed within the software, as well as other processes at work. I've also got elements of delay in there because I wanted to kind of explore that idea of it being spatial. And you can see that things are sort of generating and bubbling up. There'll be more of that with this, and you'll be able to play with that directly. So yeah, these are the slices of time that then to try and realize what that was happening with finding the scutoids in it. This is a stacking of those frames. So these have been laser cut. Again, it's quite small. I do quite a lot of my kind of development. It gets quite small. I enjoy that sense of scale because it becomes quite intimate when you're engaging with that. But you may notice on the edges that you've got these repetitive forms, and that's because it's an animation loop. And so as it's looping, you're getting this repeat. As an aside, what I found very interesting, not just the fact that there must be scutoids within that block, but it gave me a new perspective on this time-based piece because I couldn't visualize the edge of that by watching it, but by making it as a form, I could then see this other dimension of it. So that leads us to where the work currently is, or some of the work, because it's quite a large project involving many different areas. So these are stills from a more resolved piece engaging with this process, which is essentially what you're going to play with in a minute, which has just been exhibited in the National Museum of Wales. So you'll see that, it's projection in a darkened space. You've got the interface that you can play with. And then there's, it's a kind of little spoiler really, but you can play with those different parameters and it'll change the behavior of what's on the screen. So essentially I've gone quite fast there because I'd like everyone to have the opportunity to play with this.
We also entertain questions.
Yeah, I know. But we can take questions as people are playing, I thought.
Yeah.
So we've got time for both to happen at the same time.
So I had a question, though, that was one that was a collective question.
Go on then.
So if you don't mind.
Go for it. Should I set this up?
Yeah, because then, but let's do a round of applause while you're in.
I don't know how this is going to work now because I'm going to unplug that.
Can you keep this up?
Effectively.
Just do it.
Yeah, keep your presentation up, because I want you to go back to something.
Oh,
Well, it'll be on the screen, it'll be on the screen here.
I
okay.
want to ask everybody what they saw. So.
Okay.
Should you allow me?
Tell me where.
It was before your transition to the Scutoids. It was actually an image. I don't know how to describe it. It was an image of perhaps a couple people in a cafe just before that one. Before that one.
Oh, this one, yeah.
So the context is it's more of a cultural, artistic, whatever, sociological comment. So when I saw that, I thought, I wonder if other people that saw this, it reminded them of anything.
Okay.
A painting, pretty good painting. Yeah.
Go on then.
Yeah, I just wanted, if anyone saw it, it reminded me of a very iconic painting that was about 100 years ago
Okay.
by the American painter Edward Hopper.
Yeah.
I'll give you a hint, because when I saw that, I thought, oh,
Really?
Yeah.
Lovely.
yeah. So the point is that I had this cultural baggage, if you will, carried from the States.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I thought, did you
I wasn't
like other people ever have that? In looking at it, because it's, now I'm saying it maybe that for a bigger spell, but
No, I'm just ordering the coffee at the counter. It's definitely zoom in there. I can sense the guy sweeping behind the bar. I've never considered that, and that's a lovely association. I mean, I teach time-based media and I use Edward Hopper, even though I'm teaching video, just because of that cinematic quality. So maybe there's subconscious reference points there. This is quite a multi-layered image of me. That's a point cloud capture of me creating a piece of work, which ended up being this. So it's almost self-referential again, as well as kind of, close-ups of pixels on screens and stuff. But that's a lovely little visual connection. And it's interesting, that thing of cultural baggage. We all carry the cultural baggage, and those connections kind of define us in many ways. I appreciate that. I don't know if anyone else did see my books or is aware of that painting. It's a stunning painting. The light of Edward Hopper is just phenomenal. Okay, so